Fine, then just do it already. Ethan's voice boomed from the kitchen into the living room, where I sat going through last week's expenses. Do what? I fired back, not looking up. You should transfer the money to her account. You know she's struggling. You gave her almost everything, didn't you? I closed my laptop, exhaling sharply. I don't think that's necessary, he said, his tone ice cold. He walked into the room, hand running through his messy hair. You're really cold-hearted, you know that? I flicked my eyes to him, challenging him silently. He didn't respond, just shook his head and walked away, leaving the tension in the air. The past few years of our marriage had been smooth. Ethan managed a bustling local cafe. I worked as a software developer. Our routines were mundane but comforting, until yesterday. It all started when our doorbell buzzed while we were having dinner. Ethan went to answer it, and I heard a woman's voice, shaky but familiar. Moments later, Ethan walked into the dining room, his sister Lindsay trailing behind. Rachel, this is Lindsay, Ethan said softly, barely able to look me in the eye. She needs a place to stay for a while. Lindsay, whom I had only heard about in passing, stood there looking much older than her 35 years. Her eyes darted around, never settling on anything for too long. She held onto a large duffel bag, knuckles white from the grip. I forced a smile. Of course, Lindsay, make yourself comfortable. Hours later, Ethan and Lindsay were talking in the kitchen while I sat stiffly on the couch, pretending to watch a show. Their voices were hushed, but I could catch bits and pieces. Something about financial distress, emotional burnout. None of it felt right. So, how long do you think she's staying? I asked Ethan as we got ready for bed. Not sure, he responded, his voice tired. Just until she gets back on her feet. I nodded, turning off the bedside lamp. Something gnawed at me, a sense of unease I couldn't shake off. The next morning, our usual routine was disrupted. Lindsay was already in the kitchen, making herself at home. Good morning, Rachel, she greeted with an unsettlingly cheerful tone. Morning, Lindsay, I replied, putting on a neutral mask. I grabbed my coffee and headed to my office, giving Ethan a quick peck on the cheek. See you tonight. Work was my solace. The lines of code calmed my racing thoughts, but Lindsay's sudden appearance crept in now and then. Every time I tried to focus, the image of her standing limply at our doorstep popped into my mind. When I returned home, I found Ethan and Lindsay laughing over some old stories. They didn't notice me come in. The scent of dinner wafted through the air, but I felt no appetite. Anything I need to know about your sister's return? I asked Ethan later that night. He sighed heavily. Lindsay's been through a lot, job losses, a rough divorce. She just needs time. But why now? I pressed. Why not reach out sooner? Rachel, please, he almost pleaded, just give her a chance. I closed my eyes, biting my lip. There was more to Lindsay's story, more than Ethan wanted to admit. I decided to keep a close eye on her. For now, I would play the supportive wife, but I knew I'd need to dig deeper. Lindsay was a storm brewing, and I could sense that she would disrupt the calm we had built. Over the next few days, my discomfort about Lindsay's presence only grew. Ethan's sister settled in like she had never left. I observed, my senses tuned to each interaction, every little change in the atmosphere of our home. Tensions were already simmering beneath the surface. One morning, I found Lindsay lounging on the sofa, remote in hand, feet propped up on the coffee table. Rachel, could you pass me some water? She asked, not even glancing away from the TV. I bit back a sharp retort, grabbed a glass of water, and handed it to her. Here, I said, my voice clipped. Thanks, she replied absent-mindedly. Ethan wasn't aware of these small moments. Whenever he was around, Lindsay transformed into the picture of humility, polite, and grateful. But when we were alone, a different side of her emerged. One evening, after dinner, Ethan had to rush back to the cafe to handle a staffing issue. Lindsay and I were left alone. I cleaned up, and she sat at the table flipping through a magazine. So, Rachel, have you thought about letting me borrow your car, just for a couple of days till I get things sorted? Lindsay asked, her tone casual but laced with expectation. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied, keeping my voice steady. We need it for work. Right, she said, smirking slightly. Ethan mentioned your job. A software developer, huh? Sounds demanding. It is, I said, sensing some form of judgment in her words. Must be nice, she added, not looking up. Having a stable job and all. I work hard for it, I countered, wiping the table a little too forcefully. I'm sure you do, she returned, her voice dripping with something I couldn't quite place. Just don't be too harsh on Ethan. He's always been a bit naive, you know. My hands froze, but I didn't rise to the bait. I finished my task in silence, leaving her still seated at the table. That night, as Ethan and I climbed into bed, I could feel the invisible weight of an impending storm. Another argument flared between Ethan and me a few days later. Lindsay needs our support, he insisted, his patience wearing thin. It's not about support, I argued back. It's about boundaries. She's becoming a burden. She's my sister, Rachel. We can't just throw her out because she's inconvenient, he stated firmly. In the days that followed, Lindsay's behavior only became more problematic. She stayed up late, making noise that kept us awake. I'd find the kitchen a mess after she cooked. She seemed to have little regard for the home we had so carefully maintained. Ethan, you have to talk to her, I said one night, frustration boiling over. I will, I promise, he said, tiredly rubbing his temples. But I knew he wouldn't. His blind spot for his sister was too large. One particularly exhausting evening, after catching Lindsay rummaging through my belongings in our bedroom, I had to force myself to stay calm. What are you doing? I demanded. Just looking for some socks, she replied innocently, though her eyes told a different story. We have a guest room for a reason, Lindsay. Please respect our space, I said, my voice hard. Lindsay didn't respond, just gave me a small smile that didn't reach her eyes and walked out. As I lay in bed that night, Ethan asleep beside me, I knew I needed to take action. Lindsay was becoming more than just a nuisance. She was a threat to the peace and stability of our home, and I wasn't going to let her tear everything apart. It was just a matter of how much more I could take before reaching my breaking point. The tension in the house was as sharp as a knife edge. Ethan was drifting away, drawn into Lindsay's world of manipulation. It was subtle at first, small remarks and suggestions, but over time it became clear Lindsay had a plan. One Saturday morning, Ethan sat down next to me with a sigh. Rachel, Lindsay thinks she's overstaying her welcome, he began cautiously. Does she? I replied, folding my arms. She suggested that maybe we could help her get back on her feet by giving her some financial help, he said, looking uneasy. No, Ethan. She's been here for weeks, and all she's done is create chaos, I replied sharply. She needs to show some initiative and find a job. Later, I overheard Lindsay talking to Ethan in the kitchen. Ethan, I feel like a burden, but Rachel? She's being so cold, she said softly, sniffling as if she was on the verge of tears. She's just stressed, Linz, Ethan replied, trying to console her. I don't think she wants me here. I'll leave if that's what you both want, she said, sounding pitiful. Ethan hesitated. No, we'll figure something out. Rachel just needs time. That evening, I found Lindsay rifling through our living room drawers. What are you looking for, Lindsay? I asked pointedly. I was just trying to find a pen, she responded, a hint of defiance in her eyes. Next time, ask, I said. She shrugged, the smirk playing on her lips, ever so slight, but I caught it. Dinner was a silent affair until Lindsay decided to stir the pot further. You know, Ethan, I overheard some people at the cafe talking. They said Rachel spends a lot of time with her male colleagues after work, she said casually, setting her fork down and giving me a sideways glance. I felt the accusation like a slap. Excuse me? I snapped. Oh, did I misunderstand? My mistake, she said, feigning innocence. Ethan looked troubled, his eyes darting between Lindsay and me. Rachel, is there something I should know? He asked, his voice low. Seriously, Ethan, you're going to believe this nonsense? I replied, my frustration hitting its peak. Lindsay's smirk returned. I'm sorry. I must have misheard, she added, pouring fuel on the fire. After dinner, I cornered Ethan. You know she's trying to turn you against me, right? I said, my voice trembling with anger. She's just stressed, Rachel. She didn't mean it, he said, rubbing his forehead. Open your eyes, Ethan. She's manipulating you. I shouted it without caring if Lindsay could hear. The argument spiraled with me accusing and Ethan defending. Lindsay's presence in our home became the tipping point for constant stress and bickering between us. One evening, I returned home to find Lindsay sprawled on the couch, chatting on her phone. Yeah, they're out of town this weekend, she said, her eyes meeting mine before quickly looking away. Who are you talking to? I demanded. She ended the call abruptly. Just a friend, she said, standing up. Just a friend? Or are you making plans behind our backs? I shot back. Calm down, Rachel. It's nothing, she replied, but there was a knowing glint in her eyes. That night, as I tried to sleep beside an oblivious Ethan, I knew I was reaching my limit. Her subtle digs, the way she wrapped Ethan around her finger, it all pushed me closer to the edge. The house had turned into a battleground, and I was out of patience. Time was running out, and something had to change. I couldn't sit back and let Lindsay poison our lives any longer. It was time to take control before she destroyed everything we had built. The breaking point came faster than I expected. I came home to find Lindsay seated at the dining table, Ethan nowhere in sight. She looked up with a sly smile. "Rachel, you're home early," she said, her voice tinged with mock surprise. Before I could respond, she added, "I was hoping we could talk." I dropped my bag, feeling the tension coil in my stomach. "What's there to talk about, Lindsay?" She leaned back, folding her arms. "I need money," she said bluntly. "A lot of it. I have debts that won't go away on their own." I stared at her, disbelief and rage mingling. "How much are you talking about?" 10,000 should do, she replied, her tone casual. "I promise I'll pay you back once I'm on my feet." "No way," I said, shaking my head. "That's out of the question." Lindsay's face hardened. "Ethan will do it if you won't," she said, eyes narrowing. "And what makes you think he'll go behind my back?" I challenged. She shrugged. "You'd be surprised what a brother would do for his sister." At that moment, Ethan walked in, holding groceries. He looked between us, sensing the hostility. "What's going on?" "Lindsay wants $10,000, I said, not taking my eyes off her. Ethan's face went pale. "That's a lot of money, Linz." "I need it, Ethan. Desperately," Lindsay pleaded, turning her gaze on him with those manipulative eyes. "Would you really leave me stranded?" "Ethan, we can't. This has to stop," I said firmly. "We'll figure something out, Lindsay," he told her, avoiding my gaze. I felt a wave of fury. "Are you seriously considering this?" Lindsay turned to me, her voice dripping with venom. "You don't control him, Rachel." I grabbed my coat. "We'll talk about this later, Ethan. I need some air." I stormed out, my mind racing. As I walked, I knew something had to change. Lindsay was tearing us apart, and Ethan was blind to it. Later, Ethan and I confronted each other in the kitchen. "We can't keep going like this," I said, my voice raw. "She needs to leave." "Rachel, she's my sister," Ethan shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "I can't just abandon her." "Then maybe it's time to choose," I said quietly. "Her or us?" His eyes flashed with pain and indecision. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious, Ethan. She's destroying our marriage." That night, I began digging into Lindsay's past. I called a friend who worked in finance, asking for any information on Lindsay's dealings. The results were shocking. Lindsay had been involved in several financial scams, always slipping away before being caught. Armed with this evidence, I knew I had to confront Ethan. As we sat down the following evening, I laid out what I'd found. "I don't believe it," he said, shaking his head. "Lindsay wouldn't do this." "There's more," I pressed. "She's been manipulating you for years. Look at the pattern." Ethan looked at the papers, his face crumbling. "This can't be true." "It is," I said gently. "You need to see her for who she really is." Torn between his loyalty to his sister and the undeniable evidence before him, Ethan looked lost. "What do we do?" "We need to confront her," I said. "She can't stay here." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of the truth settling in. We walked to the living room together, ready to face Lindsay and expose her deceit. This confrontation would be the turning point, one way or another. Ethan and I entered the living room, ready for the confrontation. Lindsay was scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm about to crash down on her. "Lindsay, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Lindsay looked up, an eyebrow raised. "What's this about?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Rachel found something out. We need to discuss it." "About what?" she asked, her face an image of manufactured innocence. I stepped forward, handing her the documents. "Your financial history, the scams, the lies." Her eyes flicked over the pages. For a moment, her mask slipped, and fear flashed across her face. But she quickly recovered. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain." "Enough, Lindsay," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I've been defending you, but these facts don't lie." "You're really going to believe her over me?" Lindsay shot back, eyes narrowing. "Your own sister?" Ethan's face contorted with pain. "Why, Lindsay? Why did you do this? She dropped the documents and stood up, anger radiating from her. What choice did I have? You wouldn't understand. You've always had everything handed to you. That's not true, Ethan said, shaking his head. Lindsay's laugh was cold. Isn't it? Mom and Dad doted on you while I was left picking up the pieces. You owe me, Ethan. You owe me for all those years. No, Ethan said, with a newfound strength. I owe you nothing for your deceit. I stepped in. It's time for you to leave, Lindsay. You've overstayed your welcome and soured our home. You think you're so perfect, Lindsay spat, turning her fury on me. This isn't over. I held her gaze. Yes, it is. Pack your bags and leave. Ethan stood beside me, his resolve now hardened. She's right. It's time to go. Lindsay looked between us, realizing she had lost. She grabbed her bag, stuffing her belongings inside. You'll regret this, both of you, she said, her voice full of venom. We'll survive, Ethan replied, his voice steady. As she walked out the door, Lindsay turned one last time, her eyes flashing with hatred. I'll be back, she promised. Shh. Just go, I said, shutting the door behind her. The house felt lighter immediately, but the damage lingered in the air. Ethan slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. How did it go so wrong? I sat beside him, placing a hand on his back. We'll get through this, I said softly. We'll rebuild. He looked up, eyes filled with remorse. I should have seen it. I'm so sorry, Rachel. We both missed the signs, I acknowledged, but now we move forward. The next days were difficult. We had to confront the fallout of Lindsay's stay and the rift it had caused. Ethan and I avoided deep conversations, focusing on mundane tasks and routines. One morning, as we sat in silence over breakfast, Ethan spoke up. I think we need help. Counseling, maybe. I looked at him, recognizing the sincerity in his eyes. I agree, I said. We can't heal this alone. Taking his hand, we made the decision to seek professional help. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we were committed to finding our way back to each other, repairing what Lindsay had tried to destroy. The therapist's office was a neutral haven, beige walls and soft lighting, creating a calming atmosphere. Dr. Sandra Green, our therapist, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a steady demeanor. Ethan and I sat on the couch, feet almost touching but not quite. So what brings you both here today? Dr. Green asked, looking between us. Ethan took a deep breath. We need help. My sister Lindsay has caused a lot of turmoil in our marriage. We need to find a way to heal. Dr. Green nodded. Tell me about Lindsay and what happened. I shared the events of the past few weeks, from Lindsay's arrival to the discovery of her deceit. Dr. Green listened intently, making notes occasionally. When I finished, Ethan added, I feel guilty. I let her manipulate me, and it nearly ruined us. Dr. Green put down her pen. Let's focus on rebuilding trust. It's important to address the emotions you're both feeling. Through therapy sessions, we worked on our communication. We learned to express our feelings without anger and to listen without judgment. It was grueling, but I began to see glimpses of the bond we once had. One evening, after a particularly challenging session, Ethan and I sat in the living room, a comfortable silence between us. Thank you for sticking with this, he said quietly. I'm committed to us, Ethan. We can get through this, I replied, squeezing his hand. As the weeks passed, I found myself slowly letting go of the resentment I held towards Lindsay. However, one day, a phone call shattered our fragile peace. Ethan answered and immediately went pale. Lindsay, what do you want? He asked, his voice strained. I could hear her voice shrill and demanding through the phone. I need help, Ethan. I'm in trouble. Serious trouble. Ethan looked at me, conflicted. I shook my head firmly. No, Ethan. We can't go through this again. You heard Rachel. You can't drag us down anymore, he said into the phone. You can't do this to me, Lindsay screamed. I'm your sister. Lindsay, you need to sort out your own life. We're done, Ethan said, ending the call. He looked at me, anguish etched on his face. I feel terrible, but I know it's for the best. You did the right thing, I said, embracing him. She needs to learn to stand on her own. Days turned into weeks, and slowly our lives returned to a semblance of normal. Then, one evening, we received another call, this time from Ethan's old friend, Mark. Ethan, I hate to be the one to tell you, but Lindsay is in bad shape. She got mixed up with some dangerous people. Ethan's face went white. What do you mean? He asked, his voice trembling. She's been trying to con people and it backfired badly. She's looking for help, but honestly, I don't know how much anyone can do now." Ethan hung up the phone, sitting down heavily. This is what I was afraid of. I sat next to him. It's harsh, but Lindsay's choices led her here. We learned that Lindsay had been arrested, seeking help too late, entangled in a mess of her own making. Ethan and I watched, both saddened and relieved. As we continued our therapy, Dr. Green helped us focus on moving forward. "You can't change the past," she said, "but you can decide how it shapes your future." Ethan and I took her words to heart. We worked harder on our relationship, setting clear boundaries and learning to trust again. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, we grew stronger. While Lindsay's downfall was tragic, it became a catalyst for understanding and growth in our marriage. Together, we faced the shadows of betrayal and began crafting a new chapter, one built on the lessons we'd learned and the resilience we discovered within ourselves. Ethan and I walked into Dr. Green's office for what felt like the 100th time. Today felt different. There was a heaviness, the knowledge that we were on the brink of a major decision. "Rachel, Ethan, how are you both?" Dr. Green asked, her warm smile suggesting she already knew the complexity of our feelings. "Confused, conflicted," I admitted, "but we're here to figure it out." Ethan nodded. "We need clarity." Dr. Green put her pen down. "Let's talk about what you need from each other moving forward." I took a deep breath. "I need to feel safe in our relationship, Ethan. No more surprises, no more manipulations from outside influences." Ethan reached for my hand. "And I need to know you're with me, Rachel, through thick and thin." I squeezed his hand. "Always, if it means we can rebuild trust." Dr. Green nodded approvingly. "It sounds like you're ready to make some difficult choices. What about Lindsay's influence?" This was the moment. I turned to Ethan. "Lindsay can't be a part of our lives if we're going to heal. She needs to seek professional help." Ethan swallowed hard. He looked at me, anguish clear on his face, but eventually nodded. "It's what we have to do." That evening, back at home, Ethan made the call. It was short and definitive. "Lindsay, this is how it has to be. You need to get professional help. We can't be involved anymore." I watched him hang up, feeling both relief and sorrow. "I hope she gets the help she needs," Ethan said wearily, sinking into the couch. "We did everything we could," I reassured him. As the days turned into weeks, we focused on healing. Every morning, I would catch Ethan looking reflective, but he would also smile more easily. One Saturday morning, Ethan suggested, "Let's go for a walk, just the two of us." We walked hand in hand through a nearby park, the crisp autumn air invigorating us. "I missed this," I admitted. "Me too," Ethan said, squeezing my hand. "We'll make new memories, Rachel, better ones." Our walks became a ritual, a way to reconnect and reaffirm our commitment to each other. One afternoon, we decided to visit Jamie, my close friend and confidant, who had been supportive through this ordeal. "Come in, you guys." Jamie greeted us warmly, leading us into her cozy living room. "How are things?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "We're taking it one day at a time," I said honestly. Jamie gave a knowing nod. "You've both been through the ringer. It's good to see you're working on it." We spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and sharing stories. It was a relief to be with friends who supported our journey. Later, when we were home, Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with determination. "I want us to keep growing, Rachel. No more shadows." "Agreed," I said, feeling the weight of his words. No more shadows. We continued our sessions with Dr. Green, each one bringing us closer and helping us rebuild. We learned to trust again, not just in each other, but in our future. Eventually, we felt strong enough to talk about the next steps. "We should consider renewing our vows," Ethan suggested one day. "A fresh start." I smiled at the idea. "I think that's a wonderful idea." As we stood in front of a small group of friends and family, reaffirming our commitment, I felt the weight lift completely. We had faced betrayal, confronted our deepest fears, and come out stronger. To new beginnings we toasted, clinking our glasses together. In that moment, I knew that the shadows of betrayal had finally lifted, giving way to the bright promise of a future we would build together, free from the darkness of the past. The fresh start Ethan and I had hoped for was beginning to take shape. We focused on our healing, attending couples therapy regularly, and working on our communication. Each passing day brought us a little closer. One afternoon, as we were heading to our therapy session, Ethan's phone rang. It was his old friend, Mark, again. Ethan answered, his face growing tense as he listened. "What's going on?" I asked after he ended the call. "Lindsay's in deeper trouble," Ethan said, his voice heavy. "She tried to con someone, and they didn't take it well. She's in real danger, Rachel." I felt a pang of anger mixed with pity. "What are we supposed to do about it?" Ethan sighed. "I don't know, but we can't go back to that chaos. She needs to face the consequences." We went through our therapy session, trying to stay focused, but I could see the worry etched on Ethan's face. Dr. Green noticed it too. "Ethan, what's troubling you today?" she asked gently. "Lindsay's in trouble again," he admitted. "I feel guilty for cutting her off, but I also know we can't help her anymore." Dr. Green nodded empathetically. "It's natural to feel conflicted, but remember why you made that decision. You need to protect your own well-being." After the session, we walked in silence, each lost in our thoughts. "Do you think she'll ever change?" Ethan asked suddenly. "I hope so, for her sake," I replied, squeezing his hand. "But we've done all we can." A few days later, we received a call from the local police. Lindsay had been arrested again, this time for fraud. I watched as Ethan took the call, his face a mask of pain and resignation. "Thank you, officer," he said before hanging up. "Lindsay's being held on serious charges." I reached out, holding his hand. "We have to let her face the music, Ethan." "I know," he said, tears welling up, "but it hurts." Time passed, and Lindsay's troubles remained a distant shadow. Ethan and I continued to strengthen our bond, finding joy in the simple things we once took for granted. We decided to attend a couples retreat recommended by Dr. Green. "Welcome, everyone," the retreat facilitator greeted us warmly. "This weekend is about reconnecting, rebuilding trust, and finding joy in your partnership." We participated in exercises designed to foster communication and understanding. One activity involved writing letters to each other, expressing our hopes and fears. "Dear Ethan," I began, pouring my heart onto the paper. "I admire your strength and your willingness to fight for us. We've faced so much, but I believe in our future together." When we exchanged letters, I saw tears in Ethan's eyes. "Rachel, your words mean everything to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your letter is beautiful, Ethan," I replied, my own tears falling. By the end of the retreat, we felt more connected than ever. We stood on a hill overlooking a serene lake, holding hands as the sun set. "This feels like a new beginning," Ethan said softly. "It does," I agreed. "We've come so far." Back home, the weeks turned into months, our relationship growing stronger. We began planning future projects together, talking about travel, hobbies, and even starting a family someday. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Ethan turned to me. "I never thought we'd make it through all of this," he admitted. "But we did," I said, smiling, "and we're stronger for it." We received one final piece of news about Lindsay. She had finally checked herself into a rehabilitation program, facing the reality of her actions. "Maybe this is the turning point she needs," Ethan said hopefully. "Let's hope so," I replied, grateful for the closure. With each day, we moved forward, creating a future built on resilience and love. Together, we had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and ready for whatever lay ahead. As we looked toward the horizon, we knew that the shadows of betrayal had finally faded, leaving only the bright promise of new beginnings.